Hello, hello, and welcome to another podcast episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk all things big emotions, emotion regulation, resilience. Today, I have a fantastic speaker who is going to share a program that he has co-founded with other youth and will be giving us lots of ideas to help us with emotion regulation. Rafael McMaster, he's a creative leader in youth mindfulness, teaching consciousness to the next generation of students in a fresh way. He founded a youth creative laboratory, Resin, in Hermosa Beach, California, as well as founding a 501c3 nonprofit, Indivisible Arts, that teaches fundamental life tools to youth. He's published his first book, The Fundamental Life Tools. Definitely check out the show notes to find that book. I know I will be checking it out. It's coming out. And he's also has the Emerging Consciousness Broadcast Center, which I will also have the link for you to check out. And it's a destination where youth can begin learning about consciousness through tools being taught by fellow teens and youth. We talk a lot today about some of the foundational skills that our kiddos need to learn just for emotional well-being. And really, it's not just emotional well-being, it's holistic. It's for our whole quality of life and future success and just being in this world. Hope you enjoy. Well, Raphael, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Why don't we start off by having you introduce yourself to the people listening?
Sure thing, sure thing. So my name is Rafael McMaster, and I'm the founder and executive director of Indivisible Arts. Indivisible Arts is a 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on teaching mental and emotional health tools through the power of creativity and art. So ultimately, at our core, what we stand for is creativity, consciousness, connection, with an emphasis and focus on Gen Z and Gen A coming up right after them. Because quite honestly, in this world we're living in, I can't imagine growing up and being a kid right now. I feel these kids deserve an all hands on deck approach to us being there to support them. And who knows, we might end up supporting ourselves in the process.
It is unbelievable what this generation is going through. Maybe just to make sure we're all on the same page, Gen Z, are you considering like 96 onwards or what are your timelines for the generation?
Yeah, it's around right now, I believe it's around 26 to 13 years old, I think. And then Gen Alpha, 13 years older and younger. That may be right by give or take a year or two.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah.
about right?
Well, I always thought, yeah, Gen Zs, I always thought was 1996 onward. So they're going to be 30 soon, our Gen Zs. And then I think 2010 is the babies born
Yeah,
in
that's about right.
Alpha, something like
Yeah.
that. So yeah,
I know we're at Alpha. How do we end up there?
I know. I know.
But hopefully it's a renewal.
Well, where do we start? What's the most important thing? Where do we start with addressing? Is it covering, getting an understanding of what they're going through, or should we?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would love to just take a second and ground ourselves in the challenge, at hand. And, here in the States, there was a poll taken in October 2023, so a couple years ago. And it was a CNN Kaiser Family Foundation poll that found that 90% of Americans agree that, now hold up. I don't know that you can get 90% of Americans to agree on anything like the world is round type of thing. So to get them, 90% of Americans agree that we are currently in a mental health crisis. Now, the challenge with our kids' mental health and our mental health is that it's three times invisible, right? A first time invisible because, well, if there was an epidemic of broken arms, we would say we have to do something. You see all these casts, oh my gosh. It's secondly invisible because, my daughter, for example, was really struggling during the pandemic. And I would sit next to her every day on her bed. And I'd say, how you doing? We do homework. And I'd say, well, how are you doing? I'm fine. Right. She turns out she was completely on fire inside, but it sounded like I'm fine because she didn't have the tools or language to be able to communicate what she was feeling and what she was going through. So I'd say secondly invisible for that reason. Oftentimes it sounds like I'm fine. Thirdly invisible because, well, she's not telling her friends and I'm not telling our neighbors. In fact, I'm not telling my parents, her own grandparents, because, well, that's her privacy. So if we have something that's three times invisible, and yet 90% of Americans think that it's a crisis, To me, that says, okay, they're experiencing it firsthand in their own families, in their own households, in their own lives in a way that's at such a fever pitch that it feels like a crisis. And so, I feel it's worth grounding the conversation in that reality that sometimes I can look around, the world seems fine, everybody seems like they're doing good. It's not as simple as that because of the nature of our mental health issues. They're oftentimes invisible, and the chains of that struggle are oftentimes invisible until they're too strong to break, right? They say an ounce in prevention is worth a pound in treatment. And
Yeah.
anybody who's helped someone once they're in rehab or they're struggling with an eating disorder or something of that nature, once they're on that end of the struggle, it's much, much more difficult to try and support them than to be able to give them preventative tools. And at the same time, it's hard to measure the efficacy of preventative tools. How do we know what's working or not? And so for that, I think it requires our common sense and our intuition to lean into what we know feels good and seems to be working.
And it seems like it slips by. We might notice subtle things here and there, but it kind of we get to that point of how did we get here? And it's usually I was just reading an article the other day and it was a qualitative research study, but they were looking at kiddos who died by drug overdose or died by suicide, and parents were just left in shock. Like, how I had no clue. I thought they were fine, So I think that raising awareness about that invisibility is very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that a person could be doing great now, but let's check in with them in another 6 years or 8 years, right? How long did it take us to figure out that smoking is bad for us?
Right.
Or it probably took the time where the longevity increased. So we had people who were old enough to know what 45 years of smoking does, right? Well, the smartphone is what, maybe 15 years old. We don't know what 25 years of being on a phone 8 hours a day or whatever it is. The latest Nielsen, I think Q3 from last year, stated that the average American is on a screen 8.5 hours a day.
Mhm.
So 8.5 hours a day across a 77.6 year average lifespan. I think that's some like 27 and a half years on a
Yeah.
screen. I laugh. It's terrible. We don't know what 27 years of life on a screen does to the human psyche and everything else.
Well, we're already seeing its effects on the rewiring of brains. If you've ever read Jonathan Haidt's work, how it's literally and Jean Twenge, like literally rewiring our kids' brains. So we don't know the long-term effects, but we know for kids what's happening in their
Right.
brains. But I
Right.
know that that's one piece. Anything that you know of or hypothesize about that's contributing to this mental health crisis, I would say screen social media would definitely be one of them. Yeah,
Number one, the phone.
phones.
We'll just
Yeah,
start with that. The phone and prevalence
yeah,
of screens. But then once we get onto the screens, social media, gaming, the effect of, first person shooter games and young men, young people, but primarily men that are doing that for hours and hours a day, over weeks, over months, over years. And when we see these record amount of shootings here in the United States, it doesn't leave up much up to the imagination to understand where these things are beginning at.
right. Absolutely. Yeah. And for girls, it's picture-based social media like Instagram, Snap, anything like
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. And I strongly believe that comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the challenge is even if a person can, consciously try and say, no, 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 I use my social media for this or that. I'm not really comparing. The entire system is comparative. It's impossible not to say, well, wait a minute, that person got 21 likes and I got two. It's near impossible not to do that. And I feel like the entire playing field is tilted and not in our favor. And
Yeah.
it's why podcasts like this matter. It's why taking the time to care and continuing to care matters and is necessary because the playing field is not tilted in our favor towards overall wellness.
It's funny. My husband and I often talk about, we have another podcast and we've talked about, it's kind of morbid, but thinking that maybe we need a World War III just so that we go underground for 100 years and come back again and start again from
Okay, we're
scratch.
going there. Let's go. Let's go. Okay, well, yeah, sure. What if we find out it turns out um, having one of these for 35 years is actually what does you in. And then okay, so then the earth is going to wipe itself clean of 4 billion people. Maybe.
Maybe,
Maybe.
maybe,
I
maybe.
was talking to my entire team here at my nonprofit, I'm the only person above the age of Gen Z by design, which is amazing. And it's really amazing to invest ourselves in the development of these creative careers of all the youth that are on our team. But I was talking to one about, do they want to get married? Do they want to have kids? And he was just speaking on behalf of his whole generation. Like him, none of his friends, none have any interest on bringing a kid into this world. It was astonishing, and it was honest, and it was real. And he said, "Would you want to bring a kid into this world?" Now, I have a 15-year-old, but if I were to answer that question right now, that I understand where he's coming from. That's a very that as as a fundamental building block of my own psyche. If I think the world is so distraught and challenging that I would not want to bring another life form on, which is to a degree in my instinct to want to and to need to procreate, well, then how does that affect the entire rest of my psyche to feel like this world is an unsafe place to bring a child into? And how does that permeate everything else I think about everything? It's pretty startling when, with our nonprofit, right? So we have probably a couple hundred youth that come through. I'm sitting in a 3,800 square foot creative laboratory with a music studio and a fashion lab and a spray paint alley and 3D VR photography, a graphic design studio right in front of me. I'm sitting on the fashion lab table. There's fabrics everywhere around me, right?
That's amazing. That's my dream. That's
It's pretty
awesome.
cool. It's pretty cool. If you're ever in California, ever in Hermosa Beach, please come visit. I would love to share this with you. It's pretty darn
Yes.
cool. And the program we do is amazing. They're here for 90 minutes after school, and they do the first 30 minutes. We tell them it's Jedi mind training, right? This is where we teach them mental and emotional health tools. We have specific tools that I'd love to talk about today. The Fundamental Life Tools, which is a book that I just finished writing and just published a couple of weeks ago, hot off the press.
Nice.
And so they learn about these tools for consciousness. And then they get a full hour of creative laboratory time where they can learn how to play drums and sew and do an oil painting all in the same day. Just getting to explore, wherever that creativity takes you. It gives me a tremendous opportunity to sit with this youngest generation and really get into deeper conversations about how they feel about things. And there's some really fascinating things that come up that are unexpected. One thing that came up last week was that there is, and I talked to a bunch of other students to see if this was real, an underlying resentment from all of them on our generation. Really? Well, yeah. You guys say, do good in school because you're going to be the generation that helps save the planet. Can you imagine that kind of pressure? That, hey, you guys messed up the planet and now you're handing it to us as like 10-year-old kids and saying, do good in school because I need you to fix and save this thing. And it was like to a person, every kid agreed with that resonated with that in some way. When those are some of the fundamental building blocks by which they're building their character and psyche and persona atop of, uh, that's that's not a small thing. That's a
Mhm.
meaningful puzzle piece to the picture that they're painting for themselves.
Yeah. I love that you're doing that. I always say creativity is sort of the basis of all happiness. And when we do things like that, I mean, because we're keeping our prefrontal cortex online, I won't go into the science, the neuroscience of
Yeah,
it, but
transient hypofrontality, right?
And we do know being in flow, which
No.
usually comes out of these types of activities, actually shuts off that emotional brain and just keeps us at that place of mindful well-being, right?
It's what we're
So,
doing.
which is amazing.
So we speak it in those same terms to them, right? That the state of transient hypofrontality, where the prefrontal cortex shuts down, and so all that chatter, all the monkey mind shuts down as well, and you're able to just be in that coherent state of flow, right? And so this is the type of languaging that these kids are getting used to, and having as part of, you know, what they're learning about at age 9 or age 12 or age 17, 18, right? But we also talk about creativity and art as the language of the soul, that
Mhm.
my thoughts are the language of my mind, my emotions are the language of my body, and that art is the language of the soul. And that it doesn't have to be painting or drawing or even music or pottery. Anytime I'm in the act of doing, creating, the masculine energetic state of creating and making, and I do it with some, and feminine being receiving, holding space, right? And it's not male or female, but you understand. That anytime I'm doing any act of doing, but I do it with some repetition and some practice and a little bit of creativity, now it's an art. And that can be the art of how I wash the dishes, the art of gardening, how we're having this conversation. It can be done as an art form. The value of that is that, well, if art is the language of the soul, then anytime I'm doing any art, my soul's present and I can feel that, right? That's when I start to feel in flow and a sense of presence, a sense of focus. Okay. Well, then if I'm doing the dishes as an art form, then I am finding a pathway to inviting my soul to be present when doing things like the dishes or math homework or walking the dog, inviting a sense of soulful presence. And I really think I've been really keying on this word soul lately, actually because of AI. We, pre-pandemic, I remember talking to our students about AI and saying human creativity. This is so important because human creativity is something that AI and robotics will never be able to replace. Human creativity, until we started seeing AI do some amazing, creative stuff and paintings and all these visual. I mean, it's wild. And so now I'm realizing maybe that thing that is irreplaceable is our human soul, the soulful component. And it's interesting because what do we mean exactly by soul? It's a little bit different for everyone. But if I go into a high school classroom and I say, who here has a soul? Every single person raises their hand, except for that one like smart ass kid in the back who's trying to be funny, but he feels he has a soul too. Okay, so we all know we have one. And it's hard to exactly put scientific terms around it, but we have this intuitive sense of what it is. And even if it's just in my imagination, to be aligning from the perspective of the soul watching my brain, right? My soul watching my thoughts, that puts me in a place of empowerment. And this is really what we teach as the tool of awareness. And it's the same as mindfulness. It's to be aware of the voices and thoughts in my head and to be aware that that's not me.
Mhm.
I'm the one having the voices and thoughts, watching them and observing it. And I think that is the core fundamental tool for being able to overcome addiction, to be able to regulate my emotions, to be able to, you know, be able to work with my emotions, be able to overpower them when I need to, be able to dance with them when I want to. But ultimately, when I'm tired of feeling how I feel, to have the tools to be able to move on from them.
Yep.
And that's what's so critical that we're finding so effective with these young youth is giving them these tools that are commonsensical, languaging them in a way that their generation understands and resonates with what we're talking about because we're using examples that are native to their generation because this program has been co-created with them. So imagine if you take Eckhart Tolle and Joe Dispenza and relanguage it, Brene Brown, relanguage it so that a 10-year-old is talking about it as if they made it, right? And that's our mission. That's what we're dedicated to, day in, day out at this creative laboratory, which we call Resin in Hermosa Beach, and our nonprofit's Indivisible Arts. That's what my life is dedicated to.
That's awesome. And how would you help kids develop that awareness? And I would say on top of that, because some of them will say, I am so aware. I am so aware of what's going on, but they're judgy. And so it's awareness with acceptance, right? Without
Oh,
that judginess.
that's brilliant, right? So we'll start with awareness as, I don't know if you can see it, awareness is the first tool and acceptance is the second tool. So awareness is
Nice.
the first tool we teach, acceptance and the Marcus Aurelius once said, I always have the right to not have an opinion, right?
Hmm.
That any opinion I have is subjective and can change. He also said, there's never a need to listen to complaining, especially your own, right? Now, if a student says, "Well, wait, no, I have amazing awareness. I watch all my thoughts." Great. That's what we teach as awareness 1.0, and awareness 2.0 is now changing that thought to something more helpful. And so if I'm having a judgy thought, "Oh, I don't like the way that person talks to me." Okay, that might feel true to me in that statement, in that moment. Let me take a second and realizing that's a program. Well, anything that person says to me now, I'm going to not like. I'm now seeing it through that lens. Okay, what is a more helpful way to look at it? I hope this person can be more kind to me and I'll be more kind to them until that happens or whatever it is, right? So just helping them see the potential of observing their thought and then replacing it with something more helpful. And that's really the practice we practice over and every single day. Every single day, there's a different topic here, and we go through these 7 tools, but every single day we talk about awareness and observing the thoughts. I think that's fundamental to everything.
Yeah. And is there anything specific you do to help them raise that awareness or
Sure. I mean, there's obviously the natural practices with meditation, which we don't call them meditations, we call them visualizations, of course,
nice?
right? We
Yeah.
don't say mindfulness, we say awareness. It's all about making it fresh and ownable by them to a degree, or resonant, if anything. Using a lot of examples that are crowdsourced from them in real time. So we have this class, and listen, if I'm doing a class right, then it means I'm talking 10% of the time, and the students are talking the majority of the time. They're learning from each other. That's the goal. That's the jam. We have a really beautiful ecosystem here where on any given day, there'll be 30 kids in this class. 15 of them will be the 7 to 13 year olds, the younger ones. And then you have the half of them being 14 to 22 year olds, mostly high school volunteers. And so these high school volunteers, their role is to help teach these tools to the younger ones. And what that allows us to do is create like examples that are really resonant and native to how they would think about things. So one that gets used all the time is, who here has ever thought to themselves, man, oh, I hate homework? And everyone raises their hand. Are you those thoughts? No. Who are you? The one watching them, or some version of that. What could you replace that thought with? Right. Well, instead of I hate homework or I think homework is annoying, I could be saying, I'm grateful I have a free education. I have a teacher who cares about me. Once I'm done with this, I can go play with my friends. I actually like learning. I want to go to MIT when I grow up. This helps me. Now, what we're really helping them key into experience is when I say, ugh, I hate homework. Well, what program begins playing? Oh, well, the time feels like it's going slow. I keep looking at the clock and I get frustrated that my teacher, gave so many, problems and so on and so on. And they're all talking in this conversation, relating to each other, saying like, oh yeah, that's how my brain talks about it too. And all collectively hearing from each other that they have the opportunity to transform what they're saying in their own minds. And there's clear benefits. And having these high schoolers who are able to speak to it with the level of command and control over these concepts because they are in practice for years with me and they can testify. Trust me, I'm doing my college, applications, and there's so many, and my voice gets so tired in my head, and I'm able to change and say, hold up, I'm excited and I'm grateful that I even get a chance to go to this school. Does it make the issue go away? Does it do the essay for you? No. But to them, we say, but can it make it suck 20% less that day? Totally. And they've all bought into that because it is the truth. So helping them learn how to speak to themselves with programming. And Part of my story is that I'm in recovery, right? I'm 10 years sober, and I sponsor a whole group of men. And this right here is so fundamental to so many of them keeping their sobriety, really being able to watch how they talk to themselves and changing that script in something more positive, hopeful, helpful, and optimistic.
And I think I just want to highlight something that's important because I'm not big on, in my work doing reframing of thinking because oftentimes it's not helpful when we're trying to believe some alternate story. But what you're saying, and that I really want to highlight here that people are picking up, it's not just finding some like, oh, I'm beautiful and confident and
If we don't
you
believe it, it doesn't resonate. It doesn't sink in.
exactly. So you are finding gratitude. What is it that we are grateful for? And relevance, right? So it's
Right.
really tapping into an adaptive thought that we already have buy-in into that is relevant, that does promote
Yeah,
different
I mean,
behavior.
you nailed it though. Like we have to believe it. It has
Yeah.
to be authentic. I can't, and we use the example, have you ever been in a bad mood and someone says, no, just tell yourself you're happy. And you're like, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. And then it doesn't work. But if
Yeah.
I could say to myself, oh, I'm in a bad mood. Okay, hold up. That program's going to make things worse. I am using my tools to get calm and start heading in a direction I like more. There we go. That's authentic. And to be able to talk to ourselves in a language that's authentic, that's the key. Now, what's so fascinating is maybe 10, 15, 20% of the youth or the parents or whatever it is kind of just naturally do this. And those are the people whose lives like are generally nice and they're generally not disruptive. Their mental health is generally, fair or well balanced. That's not my case, right? I grew up thinking if I don't say it out loud and I don't act on it, well, then it's nobody else's business. This is my brain is my private play space where I can think up whatever, not realizing the toxicity of many of the things that I was just flippantly running through as if they didn't matter. It turns out, well, they're all programs. And so then I spent, 20 years really struggling with my mental health, in part because this lesson of awareness or being the observer of our thoughts was never laid at my feet in a way that was resonant or that I could hear it. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I went all the way through school. I went through high school. I went through college, and I didn't see anything about any of this. Right. It turns out this is what they were saying with mindfulness, but I didn't catch that. I
Right.
wasn't able to take that from them. And it was there. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it or see it. Right. And it also wasn't laid at my feet in a way where I had a teacher saying, this is important. We're going to explore this concept for a meaningful amount of time. And so now that's what we're doing with high schoolers. So our program is now California state accepted English credit, meaning the students that go through it, and we're just having a graduating class in this next week. We focus on one high school, which is Da Vinci Rice High School, which is the local South Bay, California high school connected to and dedicated to the foster system. So these are a lot of students and kids who have had really, really hard lives, and they
Yeah.
deserve all the grace that we could possibly give them. And they learn these tools, and their lives turn around, not because their outside world changes. That's not how that works. It's because their inside world changes. And all of a sudden, the sky's a little more blue. All of a sudden, it's easier to find gratitude for these things and easier to be able to manage and control and work with my own thought forms. Easier to get over that frustration because of acceptance, right? So, awareness is the first tool we teach, week one. Week two, acceptance, radical acceptance for everything as it is until,
Mhm.
and as long as I find something unacceptable about life, I'm probably not going to have serenity.
Yeah. Do you use Viktor Frankl as part of
We do.
that?
They read an excerpt out of Man's Search for Meaning, right? And there's probably about 3 or 4 quotes from him in this book, in our booklet that they use. Absolutely.
Because he's like the pinnacle of acceptance, I would say.
And it's the power of testimony, right?
Mhm.
Part of what makes his works so powerful is his story and what he went through, and while still able to have that attitude. It shows the rest of us that's possible. And if that's possible, then I can certainly do this. Well, the power of testimony for these kids to be able to teach each other these mental health tools is everything. I can talk about it till I'm blue in the face, but when a high school foster youth is talking about how they've overcome XYZ through the power of acceptance and letting go and forgiveness, well, then the 16-year-old over here who is wound up tight because the basketball coach isn't playing them enough, all of a sudden their problems get in perspective and they realize if these tools can work for this other student who is communicating with such authenticity and clarity, okay, maybe this can work for me.
I love the pure context of all of this because that's so
It's
much more
everything.
powerful. Yeah.
It's everything.
Other tools that we
Sure.
should make sure we
Okay,
talk
so
about? Yeah.
we go awareness 1, acceptance 2, intention 3. The power
Mm.
of having intention, the power of knowing what I want. We teach like a 4-step process of knowing what we want, creating a 3D holographic movie in my mind of what that looks like, sight, sound, smell, being able to experience it in my mind's eye with my imagination. Then at this point, they have their hands on their heart. So they're in a meditative place. They're thinking about what they want to have come true. Their hands are on their heart. And then the third step is they feel how good it feels that this is coming true, right? You already know this. This is the process, right? Whether it's The Secret or Laws of Attraction or Joe Dispenza, it's all saying the same stuff. It's all, and people have been doing it for time immemorial and talking about it, right? Having a vision and falling in love with it is this critical thing because that's where we release the serotonin, dopamine, right? Um, and then that's where my subconscious begins rowing for me. Like, oh, this is pleasure stuff. That's what we like math homework because it gets us into the college we want, right? And then the fourth step we teach them is go do anything towards it. You just whatever's available today. You don't need to have a plan. That stops a lot of people. I wouldn't know how to do it. That's okay. There's your North Star. You're walking towards it. Do what you can do today. And if you accidentally go backwards on the trail, that's okay. Just keep cruising. Whatever you do, don't give up.
Yeah.
So,
I,
yep,
I use the GPS analogy, right? Once we set that destination, it doesn't matter if there's detours, we're going the wrong way. It's always going to guide us back to where we need to go. Yeah.
that's exactly right. And part of acceptance is knowing that in that map, well, that's just where we are right now.
Yeah.
We're not stuck there forever. My brain tries to tell me like this is terrible and it's forever, and it's like no, 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 no. GPS, so keep it moving. I love that analogy. We use that analogy too, and particularly for the kids that are old enough, they drive. It resonates, right? And these having these visual, this book itself is extremely visual and drawn also by Gen Z youth with all the different illustrations. So it's like a person visualizing themselves looking at their own decisions, right? And using examples that teens resonate with in part because it was illustrated by other teens.
Yeah.
So okay, awareness, acceptance, intention. How are we doing so far as like hitting fundamental
Yeah,
good
this is
stuff?
great. Great. Yeah. And you're connecting things. It's not just the fluff. You're actually connecting evidence-based, like attaching that physiological piece to intention is so critical for actually
Critical.
changing the pathways in the brain. I mean, that's not the language that we're necessarily using with
Right.
kids, but that's what's happening, right? When we're looking at the
and
background.
and they're excited to hear that languaging too
Yeah.
when they hear the neuroscience of it all. It helps substantiate what we're saying so they feel they can trust it.
Yeah.
And that's when the older ones, Annie Ann, but then the older ones are now being able to testify to the younger ones who hear the kavi in their voice. And in ancient Sanskrit, there's this concept of kavi, which is a specific energy or resonance in a person's voice when they're speaking from experience. They've gone through it. You can, and that has an energy to it for sure, right? And so them looking up to these older kids, and I remember being when I remember being 11 years old, boy, a 15-year-old seemed like they were so old,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
And so that's part of the beauty and the power of this is creating that lineage, right? Part of our mission isn't to just, you know, have some writings and teach stuff. It's about creating a community. We're creating a living, breathing community. Our goal over the next 5 years is 1 million conscious youth. Conscious as defined by a person who is practicing being the aware observer, or at least knows it exists with such clarity that when you remind them, they're like, oh, yeah, holy cow. I was like lost in my head for like 2 days, right? I got to watch those thoughts. Holy cow, right? So that's how we would define conscious. Um, and I can't help but think that if you could get 1 million of them together as a singular dynamic acting body of people, that can be such a profound instrument for change and
Absolutely.
uplift. So that's the
Yeah.
goal. It might take me 5 years, might take me 15 years, might take me the rest of my life, and that's totally okay because it's what I'm doing, and I'm totally at peace with that mission of service.
Amazing. And then the rest. Sorry, I keep
No, this is great.
like,
No, it's
diverting us.
fantastic. Okay, but I do like I can tell from your response that you do appreciate where we're coming from as far as like
Absolutely.
fundamental, right? There is hundreds of great tools. Even if I were to tell you I've got 25 great tools or 15, they'd be like, oh my gosh, do I need to write this down? But seven's pretty manageable.
Yeah.
Seven, I can just start to have it like the back of my hand, right?
Yeah.
And this wasn't just created by me during pandemic. We got a whole panel of therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, a president of a health district here who's well respected, sponsor, shaman, priestess, and then all the
Wow.
kids. And you say, okay, of all the things out there, what are our final seven? So it kind of shook down to this, right? I mean, there's some good ones getting left on the the not included, but all right. So next, gratitude, right? And
Mm.
we teach it as G flipping, right? So there's just a general sense of gratitude and appreciation, but there's also using it as a tool. And this is really about all these as tools. Well, the way that our students G flip is, I hate math homework. I'm grateful I have a free education and a teacher who really cares about me. And I'm actually kind of decent at it. I don't love it, but so on, right? And teaching them to G flip as really it's a fast way. It's a heuristic of implementing awareness as the observer, creating the intention that I want to feel better and have a positive outlook on it, and then accepting what it is and having that intention. So it's a compressed, of those first three tools into one singular step. That's a lot more practical
Yeah.
because it's if you hand a student a CBT worksheet and they could walk through all their thoughts and by the end it's like, oh cool, like they're not going to do that in real life.
No.
And that's the challenge, is getting them, oh, I can just G flip this. Yeah, I'm good at that. And then we play a game. We say, okay, try and throw anything at me you can. I can G flip anything. Or another teen gets, or we can G flip anything. And these kids learn by throwing these lobbing these cockamamie terrible examples that you figure out, well, at least I have friends at all, and figure out a way to G flip pretty much everything. It just shows them beyond a shadow of a doubt this is something that works and they can do this for themselves. And once we make it fun, uh, game on,
Yeah.
game on. That's how we make it work. So fifth, compassion.
Mm.
Sixth, forgiveness and resentment, right? For the deep hurts and wounds, both physical and emotional and spiritual, that acceptance isn't cutting it. I have had acceptance for this, but I still got poison in my veins whenever I remember this. That's where forgiveness comes in, right? So for the
Right.
industrial heavy duty stuff, and some of the nuances it doesn't need to involve the other person. It's an inside job, and ultimately that some of the subtleties, like if I'm having a really hard time forgiving a person or a situation, oftentimes when I examine it closer and I look at my side of the street, it's because there's things I don't forgive myself for yet about how I behave and acted in that situation. And then by forgiving that as well, right? If my forgiveness does not include self forgiveness, then it's incomplete.
Right.
And I don't know
And
where else these kids are learning this.
yeah. And resentment's a big one because it's the killer of all relationships. And I just think of that. What's the quote? Like resentment is like
Drinking poison and
drinking
expecting the other
poison.
person to
Yeah,
die.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It
And it's
is.
letting someone else live rent free in my head,
Hmm.
as if thinking about them punishes them when it doesn't. It just makes me continue to relive this. So forgiveness is about self accountability to me. I need to make the sovereign choice that I would much rather feel serenity than to feel this anger towards this person again and again and again.
Yeah.
That's the balanced decision that I'm making, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and not only is resentment, the killer of relationships, um, but if unwatched, It's how a person's life begins to get smaller and smaller and smaller until they get to a point where they're disconnected. And then when they're disconnected, that's when all sorts of terrible things tend to crop up,
Yeah.
right? And that leads us to the seventh tool, which is connection. And we
Nice.
teach this as in connection to each other with an emphasis on service. And then these younger kids look around and see 15 volunteers that are all voluntarily here and having fun, right? Connection to myself and to my own soul and all the different pathways there, whether it be the arts or sports or being in nature, being with beauty, and helping the kids identify what that feels like and when that happens. Oh yeah, like when I'm up at bat, I feel like everything time stops and I'm totally present and I can feel myself, my heartbeat. Having them in their own words talk about to realize, oh, okay, cool. We all feel this. Okay, cool. And there's a word for this. This is what this is called. Okay, cool. And this is the flow state. Okay, cool. They just need to know. But how in the world are they going to know if we don't tell them, particularly in a way where they can hear it? Right.
Right.
So, connection to each other, connection to myself, connection to a higher power of my own understanding, whether
Yeah.
we call it source, God, higher power. And we have a very strict protocol in that none of them, nor my staff, knows what I believe. And for me, it needs to be that way. And so we have the whiteboard up there and we say, okay, well, what do you guys hear as far as words for this higher power thing? And God, Jesus, Buddha, Mother Earth, Father Sky, divine consciousness, universe with a capital U, karma, cause and effect, love, and then inevitably science. Can does science work on that board? I say I don't know. Who here believes in science? Once again, everybody except for that one smart ass, right?
Yeah.
And or the people who voted for Trump. Another conversation. And I'm totally at peace. Yeah. And um, we say, okay, well, who here feels that science is a power greater than you? And we all raise their hands. We say, okay. Who here has ever watched a documentary on like bees or insects or the ocean or the universe? And all of a sudden you begin to feel that sense. What is that sense? It's a feeling of awe that this universe is so majestically designed. How all of this works, man, isn't it amazing to be anything at all? And they're all shaking their heads. And I say, this is what it feels like to be connected to a power greater than yourselves. And we explore that. We explore the moments where we feel that state of awe or grace or a presence greater than us. And powers greater than us also are our family system, our friends, our workplace, the government, the community. These are all powers greater than me that by connecting to them, I begin to get the benefits of being one of many. Part of the problem with my challenges is when I'm disconnected and wrapped up in myself and I'm just listening to me talk about me all the time, my problems feel so overwhelming. It's as if I'm the only one who's ever had to go through such an ordeal until I talk to somebody else and they've got bigger problems.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded to a sense of humility. And so, part of how we teach humility is just about being right sized, not thinking less of myself, but not thinking that I am the controller of everything in this reality. I'm okay being one of many, and there's a gentle peace in that.
Hmm. I like that right sized. I like that. Lots to think about. This is amazing. I think you need to reach more than 1 million, that's for sure. But yeah, this
Thank
is,
you for your help in that.
yeah, absolutely. This is incredible. And time goes by so fast. Anything, I will have all of your information, your book, all of that in the show notes for listeners. Any last minute anythings that we haven't talked about that you think's absolutely important to
Sure.
share with
This
mention?
creative laboratory that I'm in right now is transforming over the next month. We're going to get through 2 weeks of summer camp, and then it's transforming into the ECBC, which the
Okay.
name these kids came up with, the Emerging Consciousness Broadcast Center.
Awesome.
Imagine like the Khan Academy that teaches math, but instead of math, it's teaching mental and emotional health tools, not taught by me, taught by other youth. So we're going to be recording all summer long. If anybody wants to check out the prototype for it, the website is theemergingc.com.
Okay.
And um, it's it's how we're going to get to 1 million conscious youth is by youth teaching each other the tools that work for them.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'll make sure I share that. And would that be the best place, or where would the best place be for people if they wanted to reach out to you?
Sure. So indivisiblearts.org. Imagine a division sign with an X through it. Indivisiblearts.org. And I am Rafael at indivisiblearts.org.
And I will have that all in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. This has been lovely. I'm hopeful to do it again sometime.